ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to what I think is going to be our first ever historical anniversary vlog here on the new channel. And we're starting, perhaps inappropriately enough, with an event that has been somewhat awkward for a lot of subsequent Scottish writers. The event itself is sort of relatively unremarkable. So on this day, the 26th of January, in 1302, a truce is agreed between the English and the Scots that's intended to last for about 9 months. Now that in itself is not all that sort of unusual, not even necessarily all that significant. What is significant though, the historian Professor G.W.S. Barrow has identified this day, or at the very least that period of truce, as the point at which Robert Bruce, at the time Earl of Carrick, and of course eventually King Robert I of Scotland, switched sides from the patriotic Scots to the English. So in this video, I'd like to have a look very quickly at the truce itself. Just briefly, just explore, why the truce is agreed, what its significance, may have been. But then I also want to have a look at why Bruce uses this moment to switch sides and become English, to use the kind of contemporary parlance. So, 1302. The English and the Scots now have been at war notionally since 1296. I will try to put in the link in the description below some links to some of my previous blog posts that might help give a little bit more context to this. But just to kind of quickly get you through to 1302, the English invade in 1296. They enjoy remarkable success in that first year of the war. And seem to have completely dominated Scotland in a very short period of time. However, there's then a period of rebellion. The Scots do start to resist. They themselves have some quite remarkable successes in that first sort of 18 months or so of that rebellion. And then we start to see a very slow process of the English kind of piecemeal trying to reconquer and reoccupy Scotland and to, suppress this Scottish resistance to English rule here in Scotland. Now in 1301, the year before the truce is agreed, there are two big English armies active in southwest Scotland. One of them, the larger of the two, led by Edward I, Longshanks if you like, a more sort of evocative name he often gets given in subsequent histories, and a smaller one led by the future Edward II, Edward Prince of Wales as he is in 1301. And these two armies spend an awful lot of time in 1301 moving around southwest Scotland, basically trying to weed out the sort of Scottish forces in that area. The Scots have been using the southwest as their kind of main power base from which to harass the English occupation forces and the English administration, such as it is in Scotland, and the English are trying to bring the kind of military wing of this Scottish resistance to battle if they can, because they think if they can smash apart the Scottish militarily, they can then basically do whatever they want in terms of establishing their own administration in Scotland. That's what had worked so well for them in 1296 when the war started, and they're trying to kind of recreate that success. However, they see basically hide nor hair of the Scots. They do manage to capture a couple of castles. Bothwell falls to the English in 1301, as does Turnberry Castle. Bothwell is in Lanarkshire, Turnberry is in Carrick. But they don't manage to get this battle that they really want with the Scots. They don't actually manage to beat the Scots in the open field and establish their authority that way. And so in a sense, the truce in 1302 is kind of a vindication of the Scottish strategy up to this point. You know, they've been harassing the English, frustrating them, but denying them the opportunity to bring their kind of superior numbers and superior resources to bear against the Scots, maintaining this kind of guerrilla war, staying highly mobile, you know, keeping out of the way of the English and so forth. And the English kind of don't have a strategy that can circumvent this or overcome this, and so in 1302 they agree to give the Scots, you know, 9 months breathing space, 9 months to sort of, you know, get their affairs in order. And of course the English in theory are also going to try and use that time to try and you know, rethink and you know, come at the conflict maybe fresh in the future. But really the truce represents something of a kind of diplomatic success for the Scots. However, this is when we get on to the man himself, Robert Bruce. The Truce of 1302 presents something of a kind of personal nightmare for the future King Robert, for Bruce, Earl Robert as he is at this point. He is under threat in 1302 of becoming a victim of the Scots' success, in effect. There are 3 reasons I would like to suggest that Bruce in 1302 starts to see English allegiance as being more beneficial to him than Scottish allegiance. Now the first of these is fairly simple and not in the grand scheme of things the most important, but Turnberry, one of those 2 castles that I mentioned the English took in 1301, is his castle. It is the caput, the administrative centre of his earldom of Carrick that he inherited from his mother. So there is a very real physical threat now to Bruce's holdings in Scotland. Now, if he wants to actually act effectively as the Earl of Carrick, it's easier for him to do that in English allegiance than it is in Scottish allegiance. Now that's not necessarily too big of a deal. You know, for all that he loses Turnberry in 1301, throughout his life he seems to have quite a sort of tight hold on the loyalties of the men of Carrick, you know, the fighting men of Carrick and so forth. So he's probably not too motivated by the loss of Turnberry, although that is in the mix. It's important not to forget about that. The second reason, though, is much more significant. And the second reason is that while we might talk about the English agreeing to a truce with the Scots, when we talk about the Scots in this period, we're talking really about the Balliol Scots. You know, the Scots that agree that truce in 1302 are, nominally at least, fighting to restore John Balliol as King of Scots. John Balliol had been king before 1296. He'd been booted off the throne and dragged off to England as a prisoner. But in 1299, I think, yep, 1299, he is transferred from English custody into papal custody. Now, as I mentioned before, the Truce of 1302 represents a big diplomatic step forward for the Scots. It represents, in effect, a recognition on the part of the English that we don't actually know what we're going to do to beat you guys, so we're going to have to take some time to have a rethink, and we're going to have to give you that time too. That kind of success can only increase Scottish confidence, Scottish diplomatic confidence. And of course, throughout the period, the Scots have been desperately trying to get the Pope on side to support them in this conflict, and the King of France on side to support them in this conflict. That means, in the wake of this truce in 1302, anyone who knows anything about Scottish politics and diplomacy at the time could only expect another big drive to get the Pope, in particular, to recognise the validity of the Scottish cause and perhaps get Balliol sent back to Scotland. Now that would be a nightmare scenario for Bruce, because if Balliol is back in Scotland, Bruce's primary ambition, i.e. become King of Scots, is entirely nixed. He can't be king if Balliol is king. And it's vitally important to remember whenever we talk about Robert the Bruce, that first and foremost in his mind all the time was that ambition to become King of Scots. That is, I would suggest, probably the main reason why in early 1302 Bruce starts to see the English as a much more appealing prospect than the Scots, because he can't now, if he wants to become king, if he wants to fulfill that ambition, keep fighting for the Scots, because fighting for the Scots now means furthering the ambition of his rivals, of the Balliols, of the Commons, of these people who have previously had the monopoly on kingship in Scotland since the Great Cause. The third reason is maybe a little bit more subtle and maybe a little bit more speculative, but by the end of the year, Bruce has married Elizabeth de Burgh. Elizabeth de Burgh is the daughter of Richard de Burgh, the Earl of Ulster. Now the appeal of this marriage, as you can imagine, the Earl of Ulster, very powerful and influential landholder in the northern part of Ireland, and Bruce, as Earl of Carrick and as one of the sort of big players in the politics of South West Scotland, the Bruce family have maintained very strong ties, political, social, economic ties, to the north of Ireland for decades, centuries, for ages. For as long as there have been Bruces in South West Scotland, near enough. So marriage to Elizabeth is only going to strengthen those ties, it's going to maintain those connections and potentially expand them. So, Bruce, very keen to marry Elizabeth, but Elizabeth's father, Earl Richard, while, nominally Irish, is without a shadow of a doubt one of the key figures in the English administration, one of the key figures in Anglo-centric Ireland. If Bruce is going to get permission from Earl Richard to marry Elizabeth, again, he is going to have to become English. He is going to have to switch sides. He can't continue fighting and frustrating the King of England's ambitions and intentions in Scotland and gain this marriage to Elizabeth de Burgh. So those are the three big reasons. That Bruce switches sides in 1302, I would say. He is physically protecting the integrity of his lands in Scotland. He is avoiding giving any more succour and any more support to the Balliol cause in Scotland, which is starting to re-emerge as a very kind of serious factor in this war. And he's trying to facilitate this marriage that he wants, and that of course he gets by the end of the year, to Elizabeth de Burgh. As you can imagine, the fact that in 1302 Robert Bruce switches sides, becomes English, and remains English for 4 years, has been somewhat awkward for subsequent Scottish writers to explain. Scottish writers who want to present Bruce as being, the epitome of Scottish heroic patriotism and so forth. So in the next video, we're going to have a look at the ways in which some medieval writers, some medieval Scottish writers, and indeed some modern writers have tried to explain, and in some senses explain away, what Bruce actually does in 1302. Bruce's time in English allegiance, how that's been understood in the historiography of the period. So, ladies and gents, thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you next time.